Hey, y'all, I'm Shane Sams. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast today. For those who may not know, I'm a self-employed, location-independent, family-focused entrepreneur, and I make my entire living online. That was my dream when I started my business, but this podcast is not about me. I started this podcast to help you find success too by interviewing some of the biggest authors, influencers, and entrepreneurs on the planet. My mission is to unlock their strategies and tactics that my guests use to succeed so you can go out and find your success as well. Which brings me to my guest today, Tom Schwab, and he is from interviewvalet.com. I have known Tom for many, many, many years. His expertise is in podcast guesting. Listen to this. Tom has been on over 1,200 podcasts. He has been interviewed 1,200 times, and he has used that strategy to not only grow his own business, but to help other coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs, authors, thought leaders grow their business as well through the power of podcast guesting. Man, this was a fun conversation. We're going to talk to you a little bit about why everybody should be in the podcast world, whether it's as a host or as a guest. We're going to talk about overcoming some major fears like asking to be on people's podcasts, overcoming the fear of being on the podcast and getting interviewed yourself, and the best ways that you can use podcast guesting to grow your audience, grow your list, and grow your business. It doesn't matter if you're an online entrepreneur trying to reach everybody in the world, or if you've got some kind of local business. Podcast guesting is a great way to get more customers. We're also going to have a great conversation about how to be a really good guest, so you knock it out of the park in such a way that the people that interview you will start recommending you for other people's shows as well. We want them to call their friends and say, man, I just interviewed this person. They're amazing. You've got to have them on your show. Finally, we're going to talk about how to find the right podcast opportunities so that you can maximize your time and always land right in front of the perfect audience. Tom is one of the most genuine, great guys in the industry. I know this podcast is going to help you today. So grab your pen and paper, a cup of coffee, or maybe a mason jar of sweet tea. Sit back and enjoy the show. Three, two, one. Tom Schwab, it is good to see you again, my friend.
Shane Sams, the only way it could be better if we were sitting down having a cup of coffee this morning, but I am thrilled to be here.
I got my coffee. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the flipped lifestyle mug, and I think I said, what's yours say?
The dude abides. Got this from a friend that's a big Lebowski fan.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I got to get one of those professional, you got the interview valet. What's that thing called that's on your microphone?
This is called a mic flag.
A mic flag. I have never had a mic flag. I've done hundreds of podcasts and I've never had a mic flag made. I'm also too, like, I'm a purist. I've been using this Audio Technica 2100 since the day I started podcasting back in like 2012. And like when they discontinued it last year, and I ordered like 4 of them off Amazon to make sure I had them stocked up and ready to go, man. I'm still like, it's like my, you know how you have like your first car and you keep it forever, even when you get your new car? That's like my microphone. It's like my old car, man. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and so many people get stuck up on the technology, right? They're like, well, what kind of microphone should I use? It's like, that's like asking Leonardo da Vinci, well, what kind of paintbrush do you use? Right? It's right. Not about the equipment. If you get a decent microphone, it'll work for you. It's about the content.
Yeah, man. I actually, back here on my, you make your little thing for your background or whatever. I have the original pop filter that I put on my first microphone that I recorded my first podcast with. And the microphone ended up being a toy for my 3-year-old daughter when she was 3 years old. And so that thing has been destroyed and lost, and I don't know where it is because she would sing into it. But I've still got the pop filter, man, from the old school first podcast I ever recorded. I'm a sentimental guy with things. Are you like that?
I am, and it's like over 500 episodes you've done now. And yeah, my first microphone broke, but I didn't tell my granddaughter that. She still walks around the house talking into it. She'll interview me, she'll sing. I'm glad it doesn't work. She doesn't need amplification.
That's right. We can just push it down to the things, man. But what I do mostly with this microphone, is podcast. And that's why I brought you on, because you're like, I have like 2 or 3 people. I'm like, who are the podcast experts who are the guys that really understand like what's happening in the podcasting world? You know, I think about Jared over at Podcast Movement. I think about JLD over at Entrepreneurs on Fire, because that dude talks more than all the rest of us put together. And then, man, I always put you in my head. I've got you categorized there, Tom. So tell everybody real quick what you do in the podcasting world, so we can have some context as we get down the rabbit hole and people understand, like, you need to listen to what Tom's saying. So tell everybody what you do.
Thank you for that compliment. And I'll be the first one to say, I've never had my own podcast. I focus on podcast guesting, leveraging other people's existing audience. You know, a lot of times people will say leveraging other people's money. Well, to me, it's even more powerful today to leverage other people's platforms. So that's what I've been doing since 2014. It's almost like, you know, Y2K, we were guest blogging to tap into other people's platforms. Today, it's guest blogging. Getting introduced on that audience, getting that know, like, and trust, getting heard. Forget breaking through the noise. I want to get heard. Yeah. And so that's what we do. I've been on over 1,200 interviews. Our company, Interview Valet, helps inspiring thought leaders get personally introduced to millions of ideal customers they could serve for the betterment of all. So we're working with a lot of coaches, consultants, nonfiction authors, and brands, people that could help a whole lot of people, right? With their current product or service. Their just biggest problem is they're obscure. Their customers don't know they exist.
Yeah, man. You and Aaron Walker, you know Aaron Walker.
I do.
Yeah, man. You guys crack me up, because like both of you have done more podcasts than me, and it's not even your show. You just go on so many, you've been guests and do other things so much. But like, that's a thing that people forget about podcasting. Like, everybody wants to start a podcast, and like, you think even like you're going to get guests and that's going to like help you grow. But we just did like a survey. I don't know what to call it. We did like an assessment of our entire business. Mm-hmm. And we did a first principles assessment. We said, what are the atoms that make up the rocks, that make up the bricks, that make up the buildings, right? Like, and that's what we did. And we started looking back. And I actually, through surveys and looking at our data of where our emails came from and everything else, I figured out that 77% of our audience, 77%, Tom, first discovered us on another podcast when I was in a guesting appearance. And then 90% of our customer base comes from our email list, like directly, like we can trace them back. Like, doesn't matter what they've seen, ads, whatever, they clicked through an ad and that's how they ended up, or an email, and that's how they got into our memberships. And when I did the math, I was like, why would we do anything but go on other people's podcasts and ask people on those podcasts to join our email list and then email them every day? And we just did an entire brand shift in our strategy, man. And we said, Shane's going on podcast. Jocelyn, my wife, you know, Jocelyn, she is now spending literally 5 or 6 hours a day on our relationship network. And we're just tapping into the guesting ecosystem because it's so lucrative and powerful. And I bet you see that all the time with the people you work with.
And it's fun and it's easy too, right? You think about the days, pre-COVID, when you jump on a plane, fly someplace, and maybe talk to 100 ideal people. Well, now you take 45 minutes out of your day and you talk to them. And not only if they're there, but throughout time, because this is an evergreen content. Cliff Ravenscraft. I remember years ago, him pointing out there, the best place to find podcast listeners for your own show is listening to podcast. Yes. It's not a zero-sum game. They'll hear you and come back. And I would argue that I bet you your data is actually better than you think.
Oh, sure. That's as good as I can tell. Right, based on what I've actually surveyed, you know what I mean?
And I remember Rand Fishkin, who runs a company or used to run a company called Moz, SEO Moz, and he talked about the problem with attribution. Right, so somebody hears you on a podcast and they're like, "Oh, I got to go back there." So they Google your name and they come back to the website, and now Google is going to say, "Oh, that was all us," and they get distracted, right, and they leave the site. Well, Facebook is going to retarget them. And then when they come back, Facebook is going to say, "Oh, that was all us," right? But in essence, what was it? Well, it was, if they wouldn't have started unless they had heard that conversation. And I'm a big fan of automation. But I really believe you're one conversation away, not one funnel away. It's that conversation that's going to bring them into the community. And that's when you can start working with them.
Yeah, it's funny too, because, when we started, so then you when you get some data, you start going like digging into it anecdotally. So like I started reaching out to some people, right? And and we started asking some of the people who we had found that said, yeah, I heard you on this podcast, heard you on that podcast. And I tried to because I've been on so many shows, like I was trying to reach out to people. Like I didn't want to reach out to all people who had heard me on Pat Flynn or all people who had heard me on Entrepreneurs on Fire. I wanted to go like, there was other obscure podcasts, right? And I was like, what made you come? What made you come? What made you come? And like, when you see an ad, I mean, you might click the thing if you want it, right? But like when most of the people said, Shane, I just loved your story. I mean, you were a school teacher and your wife was a school teacher from Kentucky, and you figured out how to make your entire living on the internet, and you had these stories that you told and they were funny. And I just really thought you guys were real people, and I was looking for real people. But you can't become a real person scrolling through Facebook. You can't become a real person in the top 10 of a search result, even on YouTube. You become a real person when you spend 45 minutes with somebody and their earbuds and they're driving to work, or they're doing on a walk, or they're doing something else. Like you're spending literal time with them. That's quality time. And they're kind of like, I heard Jocko Willink the other day say, it's like you're the third person in the room. It's not like you're listening to the radio even. Podcasting is just a different level of intimacy. You know what I'm saying?
It is. And you're building a relationship. So many things on the internet are transactional, right? Pay per click, buy this. And it's never been easier to sell something on the internet, right? Be a penny cheaper than the other person. But if you're trying to build a relationship and you're trying to build a business, that's going to take people knowing you, liking you, trusting you. That's where that lifetime value comes. And that's got to be from a foundation of knowing you. And like you said, people are going to hear you. And there's a lot of people that heard your story and didn't resonate with it. And God love them. That's fine, right? When people hear you on a podcast interview, they either turn you up or turn you off. And that's fine.
That's a good quote. That's
right.
A good
because
quote,
you only want the people that are like, man, Shane and Jocelyn, they're just like me. I want to learn from them. What's the story from the Bible? The water should be cold or hot. Lukewarm water gets spit out.
Spit you out. That's right.
So
man.
It's just like, be who you are, and people are going to like you or not. But that's fine, because what we've seen in our data is when people come back, they engage quicker, they close quicker. From all of our data now from over 7 years, the average sale price on the initial engagement is always higher when they've heard you through a podcast interview than from other areas.
Yeah, I'll tell you another thing that's amazing for us. And this is why, I preach memberships. I mean, I preach recurring revenue. This has been a major emphasis of us for years. Because, coming out of our jobs, we were a husband and wife. We had 2 small kids. I mean, you need a steady paycheck. You can't have launch to launch and hope that your next affiliate sends you some sales, right? And so we've been doing these memberships forever. And we have this weird ebb and flow. Like even when people leave our membership, we get a really high percentage of people that come back at another point, right? Because everybody quits your membership eventually, but they come back. And I kind of started like feeling this out, like, hey, what brought you back? What brought you back? What brought you back? And it always comes back to, man, I left the membership for a little while because the season in my life changed. But I kept listening to your podcast. I just kept listening to you guys. Then I'd listen to other podcasts, and Shane and Jocelyn would show up. And it would remind me to come back to the podcast. And like, it was just always putting ourselves out there in our own content, but also going into other people's places. Like, I can't tell you how many people have said to me like, oh man, I was in your community for a year and it was awesome. I did this, I forgot about it and I left and blah, blah, blah. And then I heard you on this other podcast and I was like, oh, Shane and Jocelyn, I remember them. Right. And they find you because you're just leaving these Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs like everywhere. And it's like, they can't hide from you anymore. Like they can't escape because you're just all over the place,
And some people will say, well, should I be a podcast guest or a podcast host? And to me, it's like, it's not an either or. It's like, it depends on your goals. It's like asking, should I be an Uber driver or an Uber passenger? Same platform, but different goals. So I think being a guest is a great way to go out there and get new leads, get new exposure, get new backlinks, get new networks out there. And then, like you said, having your own podcast, that's a great way to nurture current leads, current customers. The idea of, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
That doesn't work in podcasting anymore. Back when JLD started, man, get on New and Noteworthy. And
you were gold. Yeah.
You were
just
gold.
Scorched Earth podcast every day, twice a day, or whatever he did back then. Like, that's not, shotguns don't work anymore, guys. I'm sorry. It's just it's too crowded. Now it's so crowded on the hunting grounds, you'll hit somebody if you try the shotgun approach. Hey, you said something interesting there. I had another question here, but I'm gonna wait. Backlinks. That's a very interesting thing in the guesting space. I think people think, if I have I do both. I love guesting and I love my own podcast, mostly because I just never shut up and I like to talk. That's why I like to have my own show, right? But I think people are confused about how podcasts work, because they think, if I get a big guest, then I'm going to get all this traffic and everything and whatever. But that's not really how it works, because most of the time the big guests aren't even going to share you. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? Now, but these backlinks, like if you go on other people's shows, they put you in their show notes, and now there's a link from hundreds of appearances pointing back to your website. That's going to give you better search ratings. So you're going to get more traffic and things like that. Do you see that on the really prolific guesting people that you guys work with, that they all of a sudden they're ranking in Google for things and they're getting this, what's the word? Ancillary benefit of these podcasts in the search engines or in the authority from the social media networks?
Very much so. We've got some clients that do it just for that, right? You'll say, hey, do you want to go on, the Tim Ferriss podcast and get heard by 500,000 people? Or would you like to go on the Harvard Business undergraduate podcast with 200 downloads? The smart ones will say, give me the link from harvard.edu, because that's gold. And here, let me give you an example of somebody. 6 years ago, before we started working with Aaron Walker, getting him on podcasts, he was one of our early clients. If you Googled View from the Top, you got a movie. It was like a B-rate movie from Y2K or something. If you Googled Aaron Walker, you got the football player. He always used to joke that, you couldn't find him on the internet with a hunting dog. Well, he got so many more backlinks, right? All these different sites were linking back to him. All of a sudden now, if you look it up, not only will you see him rank high, but there's a knowledge panel there too. And we had one of our clients that reached out to somebody he wanted a Wikipedia page. And they quoted him $10,000 to try to get a Wikipedia page. And then the guy came back and he was honest. He's like, really, you don't need a Wikipedia page because you already have this knowledge panel. And he's like, what's that? Well, Google has seen you as, the most popular Shane Sams because of all the different appearances, the links, all the rest of that when you put the name in, they figured this is who you're looking for. So it pops up at the very top on mobile or over on the side. And that's gold. I mean, if you want to talk about being number one on Google, that's almost like being number 0 on Google.
Yeah. You're above number one because you got the listings, and you might be in the listings too. But over here on the right, it's like Shane Sams is an American entrepreneur who podcasts and whatever. And it's like you look for the, our Mexican restaurant is Si Senor. You look for Si Senor in your town. And it's like, there it is. That's the one. Like, that's the one you're going to. Basically.
Even the paid ads fall below the knowledge panel.
Wow, dude, I'm getting some gold here. See, we're gonna have to get on some more EDUs and .govs. I didn't think about that, but that matters because these backlinks make everything happen. Like, another thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I've seen some comments that we're going to get controversial here. Tom, is that okay? You don't mind to get a little controversial sometimes, do you?
I am the master of my opinion.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And there's only 2 opinions that matter right now, ours, until everyone hears this. All right. So what I see in the online business world, I think that anyone who's in the content business, whether you're being a guest or you're producing content yourself, we're all trying to get attention, build audience, and we're funneling that to something of value to us. Now, that might be a lot of people do this for love and for what they talk about and their knowledge and their passion and all that. But, many people are trying to make a living off this, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to earn an income and we're trying to increase our income. And what I see a dangerous trend in online business lately of fad chasing. Not that there's not always been fads, but like the clubhouses, like, oh, it's the next greatest thing. It's like almost like the Bitcoin version. It's like Bitcoin and crypto version of that is like clubhouses and these new tools and these messenger bots, and everybody's spending all these times doing all these things, right? But I still believe that audio content, podcasting, is the best way to grow an online business and an audience in the world, more than YouTube, more than blogging, more than anything else. Do you think that's still true? Or do you think these other things are going to are we going to look up one day and be like, well, I was a podcaster and that went away? Or what's going on with all this stuff, man?
I'm going to take it one level above that. I think the best way to grow a business is having meaningful conversations. So how can you have a meaningful conversation? I don't know that it's going to come from a TikTok, right? I don't know that it's going to be
30-second video is not going to cut it, probably.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be, I've tried Clubhouse before. In college, we had something, we called it a time sink. It meant we'd rather talk than study. And to me, that's what Clubhouse is. Yeah. Maybe I'll be proved wrong, but right now I just look at it as a time sink. I don't have extra 8 hours a week. I'd rather be working, producing, being with my family. So time will tell on that, but I agree with you on audio. And this is not my idea. It comes from a book called Leadership Literacies by, I think it's Bob Johansson. He's a futurist out of Stanford. And he said, the future is vivid audio. And let me explain what he meant by that. Have you ever gone back and looked at an old movie, like watch Star Wars with your kids? They almost laugh, right? They're like, this is so bad on the effects. Or
that's clearly a puppet, Dad. That's a puppet.
Yes,
come on, man.
You watched this, or you see something that's only a few years old and you're like, oh man, the video looks awful. The style looks awful. Or we all discriminate, right? So we see somebody and, well, they're too old. They're too young. They don't look like me. They don't understand me. We make those judgments. I think with audio, we're actually judging for the content, right? My niece was studying for her real estate license and a few years ago, and she reached out to me and she's like, Uncle Tom, have you ever heard of Zig Ziglar? They have me listen to all of this stuff of his, and it is awesome. And I didn't have the guts to tell her, honey, Zig's been dead for years, and that was probably
this guy's great. Can we go see him?
Yeah, and that this was probably recorded before you were born. But to her, that vivid audio was meaningful. And so that's why I think there's a place for video. Why not capture it? But I think what's going to really engage and live over time is going to be that vivid audio, right? It's those conversations that we have. So I agree with you. And every time I see a new shiny object that comes up and, oh, you've got to chase this. You've got to chase this. I always look at it and say, we're all one conversation away. How does this help me have a meaningful conversation? Yeah. I always say, the best things in my life have come through a conversation and introduction. Whales don't swim through funnels and big fish don't click. I did not meet my wife because I had this perfect funnel that she came through. No, we were introduced by someone. We got to know each other. We had conversations. And to me, the best things in life come through conversations.
And I think as tools go, because we've been online since 2012. Oh my gosh, everything has changed so much, right? We were duct taping our websites together back in the day and HTMLing and all these things, and and trying to figure out how to even upload your podcast to get it on Apple, and all these things were so hard. And the tools have gotten so much better. But I think the tool of podcasting, take Clubhouse. Here's my experience on Clubhouse. I thought, cool, this is amazing. I get to talk more. I love to talk, right? And I got on there and the conversations were good, but felt chaotic, right? Especially when strangers would come up on stage or someone would take the mic. I didn't feel like also there was a way to get out of the conversations. Sometimes it's when are we supposed to end this? What are we supposed to do? And the tool that was invented when podcasting was invented was a way to have longer form conversations, get away from the sound bites of the news and all these things, right? And actually get meaningful conversation flowing between 2 to 3 people, right? And then you bring in all these other people to like listen to that. And that to me is what a podcast is. It's a meaningful conversation. Like, look, we're all so busy. I don't have time to sit for 8 hours hoping something good comes out of a Clubhouse talk. I don't have time to eyeballs on the video. I got kids over here that are falling off stuff and getting hurt and doing all whatever they're doing over there, right? And dogs tearing stuff. I got too much going on to take my eyes off of them. And like, but podcasting gives you this way to say, hey, I've got 45 minutes here. I need to pay attention to what I'm giving my time to because I got one short life and I need this to make a meaningful impact in me. And that's what I love about podcasting. It's like, I don't think that I've ever, because if you hear a podcast, I love what you said earlier about turning it off. Like you can turn it off. If it's not meaningful, you immediately go to another show. But man, when you find something that's meaningful, man, I was having a hard day yesterday. I had a team situation that, I had to really tap it deep into my leadership and figure it out. I didn't know what to do. And, me and Jocelyn had kind of talked for a minute and I said, hey, I'm going to go for a walk and just clear my head. The first thing I did was type that situation into Apple Podcasts, found a meaningful podcaster that I respected talking about this topic. 45-minute walk, came back, knew exactly what to do. And I've not found a medium that can produce that, like you said, like Vivid Audio delivered through podcasting.
The other thing that you point on there is the time shifting, right? And that's something that not a lot of other mediums have. So Clubhouse, I get up at 5 a.m. every morning. If there's a great Clubhouse that I want to listen to at 10 p.m., I'm sorry, I'm not staying up for it. Whereas a podcast, you can listen to it when you want, where you want, even at the speed you want, right? So 70% of the people that listen to podcasts listen to them sped up. So I always joke that, I listen at 2x as I run at half x, right? That way I get more content in. But what other medium can you do that on? I guess video now you can change the speed on, but it looks really weird.
And you're not going to look at it. I don't even watch YouTube. I listen to YouTube, like I find conversations and stuff like that. But like half the time I'm looking out the window or doing something else. I'm not even watching the video. The only time I watch the videos is if I need to learn how to use a piece of software and it's pointing and clicking and showing me what to do. But with audio, man, you can just throw it up anywhere you want and you don't have to worry about it. It's on demand. And one of the things that I was so blessed to learn early in my journey as an entrepreneur was is just in time learning. This concept of don't just sit and read random books and all this. Like, what do you need to move the needle now in an area of your life? Find that resource and use it. And that's what's powerful about podcasting. You just type in any subject you can think about. You're having trouble with your marriage? Go type in a marriage podcast. You're having trouble with your kids? Go listen to a parenting contest or a podcast. You can just find the answer that you need and inject it in your life, like the shower. Who doesn't? I love sticking the phone up in the corner of the shower and just listen. That's what you got. 30 minutes. You're getting ready. You're brushing your teeth. Like, man, you just you can tap into the wisdom of the collective humanity. And I just can't even do that with Google anymore. Like finding the answers, man.
And you talk about consuming it that way. And I totally agree with everything you say there, but think about producing that content too, right? You're a teacher. I'm sure you're a good writer. I'm an engineer by degree, right? People joke that English is my second language. I'm not sure what my first one is, but for me, writing a blog is a homework assignment. Whereas being on a podcast, that's easy. And so we can create in the way that's easiest for us and then use technology to repurpose it. So, you can, I can be on a podcast interview, have somebody transcribe it, have somebody else clean it up and make me sound, like I'm somewhat intelligent.
You got to take a lot of y'alls and yeehaws out of my transcripts. They got to get the southern. They got to southernize it. They got to translate it. Really, it's not a transcript; it's a translation from all these silly things I say from Kentucky. You know what I mean? That is so true, man. I mean, you can do like the audio can be turned into anything. Like our courses, and it's hilarious. Like I'm giving away the secrets here. Our courses in our community, like we have this process, right, of everything we teach. And I told my wife, I was like, man, I don't want to make PowerPoints. I don't want to do this. I just want to talk. I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to write an outline and I'm going to sit here and talk into this microphone. But then we paid somebody to make the PowerPoint slides. So they went in and just took my audio, and they have all the slides like I would have created, and they're better than my slides because I'm terrible at it. And they just made this thing, and it all came from our audio. We had this idea to take the 12 biggest mindset obstacles our people had and turn that into a course. Well, we wanted to do that. We wanted to add that to our community. And I was like, let me just record it. And then you all go turn it into courses. And so I just spent 1-2 days recording that, and it all turned into that. Dude, I know people who podcast, and they'll be like, okay, I want to write my next book. They'll do 10 podcasts. They'll have it transcribed, hand it to a ghostwriter. They'll clean it up, hand it to an editor. They'll clean it up, and they'll launch that thing on Amazon. And they just wrote their next book while they were recording their podcast. It's absolutely amazing what you can do with the audio once you got it done.
You'd be amazed how many big books are done that way.
Oh,
One of Vaynerchuk's books, you can tell it was dictated. Heck, my book, I've been working on it forever, and then ran across Pat Flynn's idea of put all the sticky notes up there, get the outline there, and then just start ranting on it. I was able to get my first draft of it done within about a day, just because I dictated it.
That's amazing. Dana Derricks, I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's like, Dana has a big thing called the Dream 100, but he just released a new book recently. It's called 1 Week Author. And he spells out that exact process of speaking your book, who to give it to next, and then getting it out in like a week. He's like, you hire this person on Wednesday. They read through it by Thursday. This person edits it till Friday. Next Monday, you got a book, right? So it's pretty amazing. So let's shift gears here. We talked a lot about content creation. The podcast world is all about content creation. I want to get into guesting. I do have one more comment here. The one more thing about audio that's amazing is, we talked about was it your daughter that was listening to Zig Ziglar? Is that what you said?
My niece. Yep.
Or your niece. All right. But me and Jocelyn were in the car the other day, and we were talking about things you talk about in your 40s and 50s, whatever. It's like, hey, we're not going to be here forever. What's life going to look like in the next chapter? What's it going to look like eventually when we're gone? Are the kids going to be okay? Like we're talking about these things. And I said something to Jocelyn that had never occurred to me. I was like, Jocelyn, how many like children, like my son is 12, my daughter's 10, and they listen to me. Sometimes they listen, like, oh God, Dad, and they're rolling their eyes and all that good stuff. But like, how many, someday they're going to look up and go, man, Mom and Dad weren't so bad. Right. And even if we're gone, those kids are going to have 1,000 hours of me talking and having conversations to people. Like they could spend their whole life. They could show it to their kids. Like if they ever needed to know something, what I thought about, it's probably on one of these shows, and that's a legacy that is just being left behind. I think how many people don't podcast, and when they're gone, and they have their memories and their kids have their things. But now, like literally, it's like, hey, I wonder what my dad thought about online business. I wonder what my dad thought about God. I wonder what my dad thought about marriage and parenting and whatever. Man, you just fire up we've got 200 interviews he's been on, and we've got all his podcasts, and you can just sit and listen to that. That gives me like some kind of like peace and solace in my life, that if something happened to me, at least I could guide them through life a little bit when it gets challenging. You ever think about that?
I do. And I take it one step further. I've got a picture of my grandfather here. I was probably 5 years old, and I adored that man. He passed away when I was in high school, but I would love that. I mean, I cherish the pictures of him. Can you imagine if I could hear the recordings, every now and then we'll find an old movie or something like that, 8mm movie. I'll sit and watch that forever, just to see him. And to say that had all these recordings that I could listen to in his voice, that's amazing.
Yeah, man, it's unbelievable. I mean, you could speak millions of words to your children from the beyond. And eventually they're going to be able to upload us all into thing and turn us into robots anyway, right? So maybe they'll have the Shane Sams 3000 eventually. Hey guys, welcome back. And they'll upload all my podcasts into it, and it can figure out what I say. All right, let's talk about guesting. So this is a totally different concept. So like over here, guesting, I think, scares people because one, they're afraid to ask. That's one fear we hear all the time about guesting. Two, they're afraid. I think it's like a cousin to imposter syndrome. They're afraid to be in the moment, and that they're going to be maybe asked something that they don't know. That's another common fear I hear about people not wanting to go on guesting. Tell me like about guesting, about the process of getting on a show, about the process of delivering your expertise in this environment. I mean, sometimes, you know how podcasts, you show up, you've just met the person, and now you're going to have an hour long, deep conversation. Like we know each other. So like,
Right.
of course it's going to be a little more comfortable and we're just laughing and joking around. But tell me about guesting, the best way to do it, the best way to get on shows, and the best way to get through some of these fears about reaching out and imposter syndrome and stuff like that.
Well, and I love how the words you used in there, you used ask, right? You ask to be on a show. You don't pitch a show, right? You pitch a baseball, you introduce a human being. So really think about it. It's like, what value can you add to the audience? And, I used to have the problem with the term expert. Am I an expert? Nick Pavlidis, who's a reformed lawyer, retired lawyer. I don't know what term he uses now. He
just
pointed
anything
out,
but lawyer is what he's trying to say.
That's right.
Racing down.
So he pointed out to me the legal definition of an expert is someone who by their experience, knowledge, training knows more than the average person. So if I say I'm an expert, it doesn't mean I am the world renowned expert. I have expertise in that. And there's different types of experts, right? You've got the academic, right? They've got PhD, they've got all these other things. Actually, they don't do really well on podcast interviews because they don't relate to people that well. And then you've got like the old sage, right? That's been doing it 40 years and can talk of experience. Well, they do it okay, but often you find that the examples they're using are, it's like, yeah, well, that was before the internet. It really doesn't apply there as much.
That's right. They're still sitting in their office with no computer. Back in my day.
That's right. Well,
I love people like my cousin has a great quote that he says, because they're the same people that'll tell you how deep the snow was on their way to school. And you're like, nobody walks to school anymore, man. Like we Uber. But it's like, he says that the snow will never be deeper than the last generation's walk to school.
True.
So, yeah, man.
And the type of expert that actually does the best is the Sherpa, the traveler, that person that's going along with you, and that has done it. So you and Jocelyn, right? You're a few steps ahead of everybody else. You can relate to them. Yeah. Nick Pavlidis, when he did his book Confessions of a Terrible Husband: Lessons Learned from the Lumpy Couch, it's like, yeah, he's just like one step ahead. And those are the type of experts that do the best, right? The other thing with the podcast is some people will call it an interview. That's a misnomer, right? This is not a 60-minute interview. We did not walk in here with, you had 10 questions and number 4 was a gotcha, right? It's a conversation. People are only going to ask you what your expertise is, right? You're not going to ask me my expertise on something I know nothing about, because that wouldn't help you. It wouldn't help me. Most podcast hosts, I would say all podcast hosts, they want to make the guest look great, right? They want to make it look like they've got a great resource there for it. So really, it's don't focus on the interview, focus on the discussion.
Yeah.
And with that, focus on what value you can bring. Vaynerchuk always talks about, jab, 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 right hook. I always look at it as serve, 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 ask, right? So if you want to be on somebody's podcast, serve them, right? So leave them a rating and review. All podcasters are vain, right? Everybody looks for their own name. So if they see it there, they'll know who you are. Engage with them on social media, right? Make a comment about something, share something about it, that whole thing of serving them. And then reach out to them and say, hey, I have this expertise. I know this. I think it could be helpful to you and your audience. Is that something that would be, of interest to you? All of a sudden, they're going to be asking you to be on the show where you don't have to ask. Or once you get on a couple podcasts, one of the great things to do is after you're on your first one, at the very end, say, Shane, I had a great time on the show here. Do you know anybody else that I could serve? Any other podcast hosts that I'd be of service to? Podcasters know podcasters, right? And if they give you 2 names and so on, your dance card gets full. The hardest podcast you're going to do is your next one. It's like the hardest step you're going to take is the next one. After that, they just keep getting easier.
I find too that one of the things I love about the way you talk about this is it's so old school relational in a good way. It's like conversation, relationship, service. And I get my podcast, I get so many emails that are just so terrible. Like, Dr. Jacob Smith is a dentist out of so-and-so, and he has talked about how to replace the best crown in the world. And would you please, that's clearly somebody's just looking up every podcast and trying to ask anybody and anywhere where they can be. There's no discussion of alignment. There's nothing at all, right? Like that. And I'm like, man, I don't want to be that guy, but like most of the great podcasts that we've been able to be on have come through putting ourselves in the right place at the right time to serve the right people and get on those shows. Like, it's all based on, like, I go to the podcast conferences because I know everyone there's a podcaster. So I've put myself in a place where I almost can't go wrong to find somebody that I could serve. Right. I just have to figure out who that is at that point. Or another great tactic, we can call it tactic, but honestly, like, people can't, just like they can't ignore their vanity and like, oh, they left me a review. What a cool guy. Like, they can't ignore their customers. Like, I've literally become customers of people. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I need this thing. Plus, this is going to help me build this relationship and put me in their orbit so I can figure out how to serve them. Right. And even if they never invite me, that's great, but they might ask me to be on. That's how we got on Smart Passive Income is I built a relationship, a conversation with Pat through email. As we were coming up, Pat was just getting bigger. Like, he wasn't even getting big yet. He was in his first 50 to 100 episodes. Right. And you could still email him, he was still checking his own email. So I got in this conversation. I was just documenting our growth and I heard this podcast. I did it. And we just became kind of like pen pals a little bit for a minute. And then Pat was having an event and I was like, wow, those people in that room look like they're going to be, online entrepreneurs. I'd like to be around online entrepreneurs. And I bought a ticket, flew out to San Diego, met him in person, told him our story. And, and of course that episode served his audience well because it's a real story of a couple kids from Kentucky that figured out how to do this, and it's so funny, like, how you have to think about opening your sleeves or rolling up your sleeves, opening your wallet and getting into the right orbits. Right. And sometimes that can be really quick. Like, I can send someone an email sometimes, be like, hey, I'm Shane Sams. I've done a couple things, man. You're like, there's a Christian podcast that I'm going on pretty soon. Right. And it's about being a great dad. Right. And I was like, hey, look, I know that my story has impacted this audience, and this audience. I really think this would resonate with a recent podcast that you just did. Like, it's a similar story. And the dude was like, yeah, man, let's do this. Let's talk. And then sometimes it's a longer process, but it's all relationship. It's all, what do we have in common and how can we go serve together? It's almost like figuring out where you're going to sit at church. You know what I'm saying? You got to figure out the right pew. You know what I mean?
Well, you think about it from the host standpoint. So if you're a host, there's 3 types of people you want to have on your podcast: your friends of friends, and people you want to be your friends. That's it. That's the only people you will ever have on your podcast. Nowhere in there is creepy cold pitches. And I get
total strangers who just want to milk me dry.
Well, I get pitched to be on my podcast. Everybody loves it. It always starts the same. Tom, we love your podcast and would love to be a guest. The only problem is I don't have a podcast, but I am on the same list that you are.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So with that, if you're already friends with them, it's easy, right, to get on the podcast. If you've got friends of friends, and that's somewhat what we do, right? Yeah. We've been around since 2015. We've got the relationships. We know the people. So you can tap into our relationships, but we're also helping people with the expertise on it. So it's really a system. So you got friends of friends, and then people who want to be your friend. So that introduction that you did there, I'm sure they looked at it and said, oh man, this is somebody I'd like to get to know. I shouldn't say hate, right? You're not supposed to hate anything. So I loathe the courses out there that are teaching you how to have the perfect pitch, the pitch that will work every time. This is the pitch that got me on this show. I say the perfect pitch is, can I be on your show? It's worked, right? I guarantee you, the president of the United States, actors, all the rest of that, they can use that pitch. And people would be like, well, yeah, but that wouldn't work for me. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not the pitch. It's not the verbiage. It's the relationship behind that. So I would just look at that, friends of friends, and people they want to be their friends, right? What could you
amazing.
do to say, man, I'd like to get to know Shane.
So get in the same group and hang out, and maybe I'll get you on my podcast. Let me ask you this: how do you be a good guest? So I think this is everybody's so concerned about being on the show, and then that all of a sudden there's a fear of, oh gosh, I got on the show, what am I going to do, right? But like, being a good guest is really important, because when someone lets you on their show, there's this weird stacking effect with podcasting that happens. Like, I can probably get on most shows just by saying, hi, I'm Shane. I think that our messages are in alignment. Oh, by the way, I've been on these shows. Like, I can say that now because I've been on Mixergy, Pat Flynn, John Lee Doom. You name it, you've been on them. But that wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning, it was like Fred Thompson. I know you never heard of Fred, but I was on his show if you want to listen to it. You know what I mean? But like once the reason that stacking effect took place is because I'm a great guest. I go in there trying to serve, trying to have value, trying to tell stories and all those things. How can people prepare to be a great guest so they get this compound interest and effect? And it creates momentum where they push a couple dominoes, and all of a sudden the whole stack starts falling down. They get on a bunch of shows.
And the key word there is guest. Forget about being on the podcast. What do you do to be a great guest? So if you invite me to speak on your physical stage, if you invite me to your home for dinner, if you invite me on your podcast, what does it mean to be a great guest? Well, the first thing is show up prepared. Right? Know who you're talking to. Show up on time, right? Be gracious. People say, well, fashionably late. No, there's early, on time, and there's rude. And I'm amazed how many people would show up and be rude. The other thing is, when you get there, your number one goal, and this is something we teach all of our clients, your number one goal on a podcast interview is to make the host look like a genius for introducing you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's a podcaster, DJ Doug Sandler from the Nice Guys on Business. Love his quote that he gave one time. He said, if you do a good job on my podcast, you don't have to promote yourself. I'll promote you more than you ever could. So be there and add the value. Be gracious. Thank them. Right. Don't just go in there and, hey, I'm here to start talking about my talking points. Yeah. Be gracious, give free gifts, all the rest of that. And then afterwards, here's an amazing thing. Why don't you say thank you? Right. That could be an email. It could be a note. It could be mailing them something. Or I'm amazed how many times people will go on a podcast and then not promote it. It's you just had me on your platform. Yeah. Why would I not promote that when it came out? Why would I not tag the host in that? So all those little things, you'll get the reputation very, very quickly as a good guest or a bad guest. And here's one of those ugly little secrets that no one will tell you about podcasting is not all the interviews go live. Some of them get lost. You go in there and you show up late, not prepared, and then just start going on an infomercial where you start just trying to sell your stuff. Most hosts will be very gracious and say, thank you, all the rest of that. The interview will probably get cut a little bit short, and then there'll be technical difficulties. Oh, we lost the recording. It never goes live. Yeah. And podcasters know podcasters. So if you have a great conversation with a guest, you'll be telling your friends that are podcasters. You'll be making those introductions. And if you had somebody that came there to use and abuse your audience, you'll also tell your friends that too.
Yeah, man. And I the work that goes into guesting is what I think people think it's just like, oh man, if it's like the lottery, if only someone would let me on their podcast and I would go in and sell all my stuff and everything would be fine. Right. But that's not it. Like, I mean, like when I go on a show now, like our basic system is like, we have a team. So that everybody listening is like, you got a team. Well, you can do this. Like Jocelyn spends 30 minutes researching the guest if I don't know the host, and she gives me, and she has a document and she goes over it with me. And she's like, we spend time, I want to know who these people are. I can't wait to, I email my list every time I go on a guesting appearance. Like if someone brings me on their show, I'm giving them my audience too. Like, hey, you got to listen to this. I found this awesome podcast I was on. The host is Bob. He's awesome. And we had a great conversation about XYZ. Go listen to it. Like, I'm not going to be stingy with my list and my social media. Like, and we try and we share it. So we have like a full before and after. Jocelyn writes a handwritten thank you card to them to make sure that, like, I mean, you have to view it with reverence when someone lets you in front of their audience. Like, that's a big deal that they have learned enough about you, respected you enough, trusted you enough, like, to do that. So like, you have to be really thankful and appreciative. And I worry about people who are like trying to get like on 10 podcasts a day and they're just recording them all back to back. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're just ghosting and getting out of there. And like the host is going to feel terrible, you know? And then it's like, now you can't say like, oh, I was on so-and-so's podcast. And then you send that to another podcaster and they know so-and-so, and they send the message to so-and-so and go, tell me about this person that wants to be on my podcast. And they're like, well, I don't know about dude. I don't know about that. You know, I tell you my struggle, Tom. The more you podcast, the more you get, it's like coaching. The more you get asked the same questions. And it is really easy to fall into what you said earlier about telling your talking points. You know what I mean? How do you avoid that when you go on shows? Because you've done 1,000 podcasts, you're going to get asked the same thing. Is it just like being really into the conversation, paying attention, curious, so that you can add nuance to it? Or how do you keep from falling into the podcast valet talking points or whatever?
I would say content is king, but context is God, right? So if small g, if you know the audience you're talking to, you can change it ever so slightly to make it more meaningful to them. And, you know, what you talked before about, you know, just do more and more podcasts. I always tell people, instead of doing more podcasts, why don't you do more with the podcast? Because like the example that you used there, you know, 10 podcasts in a day. It's like the person that comes out and goes, yeah, I want to go on, you know, on 10 dates in a day. Really? I wonder how, right. I wonder how those are going to go. Do you think there'll be a second date after that? No, that's a transaction, and guaranteed word is going to spread around town of who you are and what you're doing, just the same way in podcasting. So don't focus on doing more interviews, focus on doing more with the interview. So like you said, the prep, that's something that we help all our clients with. We brief them on all the shows, the follow-up afterwards, and just being present in the conversation. Have fun with it. And that's one of the things we tell our clients too, is at a certain point, people will say, well, you know, I want to do 3 a week. I'm like, that's what you say now, but you're going to get burned out and it's going to come through. None of us are good enough actors to not let that come through. And if you're not having fun in the conversation, if you're not in there, if you're thinking, oh, shoot, we got to wrap this up because I've got another interview number 7 is coming up right after this. It'll come through in there. So do better interviews. Don't just do more interviews. And then the other thing with that too is that bigger is not better, right? The people that say, oh, just, you know, I got to get on the biggest show. Well, if it's not a good show for you, why would you want to be there? You know, value the audience that you're with at the time.
Dude, I'll tell you, we'll close that pretty soon, but I'll tell you this funny story about misaligned audience. Okay. So I got a message last December. It was crazy. I thought it was a prank at first. Someone got a message to my assistant and she's like, do you know what this is? It was Coast to Coast AM radio, which is a super famous late night show on where they talk about like Bigfoot and UFOs and all kinds of stuff. Right. And I remembered I knew what this was because I used to, some buddies of mine, we would drive from my hometown down to Tazewell, Tennessee, when I was in college, and we'd play cards with some buddies down there. And we would play, you'd get there about 8:00 and we just play cards till 2 a.m. And we'd hit Crystal or White Castle. I don't remember what, those little burgers, you know what I'm saying? And we would drive back home through the mountains and we would listen to Coast AM, man. And we'd be like, you think there's really Bigfoot in these hills? What about that? What's that light up there? Is that an airplane or a UFO? Right. I remember talking about this stuff. So I was kind of like a half a fan, and I knew about it, and they were like, "Hey, we'd love to interview Shane on Coast to Coast AM radio." This is just like a top 50 radio show on the planet Earth, man. Like I was like, I'm not turning that down. It's a huge audience, right? You're talking 1 million, 500,000 people listening at any given time. So I schedule it. I do it on Christmas night, it was December 26th at 1 a.m. is when I went live. And I spent 2 hours with this host. And she was so gracious, and man, she was awesome. Her name's Connie, and she just was. Their heart was in such the right place. What they wanted to do was where so many people had problems with the pandemic. A lot of their audience is in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, so they wanted to introduce them on a new way to make money, right?
Okay.
So, but it was still totally off topic, man. And like I will say this, a lot of the people we got hundreds of emails from that appearance, right? It was ridiculous. And many of them have become outstanding, awesome members, right? But man, 75% of those emails were not aligned. And we had more customer service, and we had more problems, and we had more it was wild. And it was just because they were not aligned. They were not an adjacent audience is what we call it now. And so you do have big opportunities, like seem like a great idea, can be a great idea. There were positives that came out of that big time. But man, I've never been on a guesting appearance like that. And I probably wouldn't go back if I had to. You got to say no to some opportunities in the podcast world, right?
Have you noticed when you start Googling people, often a podcast will show up?
Yes.
And it's not always the most popular podcast, but it could be the most recent podcast. And I've told a lot of people this. It's like you're judged by the company you keep. So be careful if you're on, I call them Wayne's World podcasts, two guys in their mom's basement,
right.
If you're a high level consultant, coach, something like that, and you're on, the Stoner Brothers podcast, what harm could it do until somebody Googles and they want to sign you up for a 6-figure consulting contract, and they Google your name and it's like, yeah, not this guy.
Smoking Weed with Shane Sams. Wait, what? Was I on that show? I don't think I was on that podcast. I did that 10 years ago, guys. I didn't inhale. I swear. Awesome, man. Well, listen, Tom, I love you, man. I really wanted to introduce you to our people and our audience, man, because I just want to tell everybody out there, like, we have worked with Tom before, and I will say was one of the most professional outfit I've ever had, man. Everything was Johnny on the spot. Everything was perfect. You guys are great people, excellent values. And man, I really do, man. I put you in that upper tier of the podcast world. You got people that are hosting, you got people that are guesting, and you got connectors. And you do an absolutely great job over at Podcast Valley. So tell everybody where they can find you guys online.
Well, Shane, thank you so much. And on that, if we can be of any service to you, I'll put some resources at interviewwithav.com/flipped. And awesome. There's a assessment we have, 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for you? We'll put that assessment there. I mentioned my book. I sell a lot of copies. I give more away. If you want a free copy of it, either hardbound or paperback or Audible, I'll send you one of those. Or if you want to talk and say, hey, how could I use podcast interview marketing in my business? I realize that obscurity is my biggest problem. I just need to get out there and tell my story. Well, go back to interviewvalet.com/flipped, and we'll put all that stuff there. There'll be all my social media links, a link to my calendar so that we can talk.
Shout out the book. What's the book title?
Podcast Guest Profits: How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy.
And I will tell everybody this is an honest to God story. I don't know if I've told you this. I think I might have sent you a Facebook message. When we did that data search and we found that out, and we were like, wow, looking over the last 10 years, I bought everybody on my team a copy of your book. And I said, every one of you read this. This is what we're doing. The whole team is involved in this. I don't care if you're in customer service or what, you're going to be involved in this. And we gave them your book. Jocelyn got them your book, man. So I love it, man. All right, man. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll share this everywhere in the world, Tom. Have a great one.
Thank you, Shane.
All right, y'all. That is all the time we have for this episode of the show. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found today's podcast valuable. If you did, could you do me a favor? Go subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And if you could, please leave me a 5-star rating and a review. I read every single review, and I cannot wait to read yours. After that, go tell a friend about the podcast and have them do the same. I'd also love to connect with you on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at Shane_Sams. Feel free to tweet me at any time. And if you want to learn more about how I became a self-employed, location-independent, family-focused online entrepreneur, and if you want to find out how you can do the same, head over to ShaneSams.com. That's ShaneSams.com, and learn all about my online business coaching community. Head over to ShaneSams.com and learn all about my community and my online business coaching program. That's all I've got, y'all. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, remember these words I live by. Dream big. Take massive action. Be consistent. Be prolific. Be relentless. And do whatever it takes to take control of your life and change your family's future. I'll see you next time.